My name is Maggie. I'm 62 years old, and last month I took everything my husband loved and made sure he could never get it back. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't even cry. I just left him standing there, stunned, broken, and stripped of the only thing he thought I could never touch. Justice must be restored, and betrayal must be punished. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Margaret, though most people call me Maggie. 62 years on this earth, 40 of them married to Harold Douglas. To the outside world, we were a success story. We met young. He was 23, I was 22, both working at the same insurance office in Dayton, Ohio. He was quick with a joke, and I laughed too loud for the room. We eloped after 6 months, the kind of impulsive decision that everyone thought would burn out fast, but it didn't. We built a life on hard work and small sacrifices. I clipped coupons, cooked casseroles, patched clothes. He started in insurance with me, but it wasn't long before I saw the boredom eating at him. He was restless, like a man wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. Within 2 years, he left the office, took a position managing a high-end auto repair shop in town. It startled me, but it also fit him in a way insurance never had. He wasn't one of the mechanics, not really, but he was shoulder to shoulder with them, running the books, dealing with customers, learning the language of engines until it rolled off his tongue. He came home with oil smudges on his sleeves, smelling of grease and gasoline instead of ink and paper. For the first time, I saw him light up. By the time the kids were in grade school, Harold had fully settled into that life. And then came the Mustang. It was 1986, and he brought it home on a trailer like some prize catch. A battered 67 fastback, more rust than paint, seats split open, engine coughing smoke. He parked it in the driveway with a grin I hadn't seen since our wedding day. "This," he said, patting the hood, "is going to be my project, my toy. One day I'll get it running again and we'll take her out on the open road." I laughed because at the time we had 2 kids fighting over the backseat of our old station wagon. The idea of Harold's toy seemed ridiculous. But little by little, that car became part of our family. He worked on it mostly on weekends, tinkering away while the kids rode their bikes in the cul-de-sac. Sometimes he would call them over, showing them how a carburetor worked, letting them hand him wrenches with greasy fingers. And when the Mustang finally roared back to life, shining candy apple red with polished chrome, it was Harold's proudest moment. We took family drives in it, windows down, wind in our hair, radio turned up. To the neighbors, it looked like a classic car. To Harold, it was more than that. It was his weekend video game, his fishing boat, his golf course, all rolled into one. He babied that Mustang the way some men baby their hobbies, always polishing, tuning, tweaking, but he never locked himself away from us for it. He still made time for family dinners, school plays, Sunday barbecues. The car was just his youngest child. I didn't resent it back then. In fact, I was proud of him. He had worked hard, built something with his own 2 hands, and still managed to be present with us. For years, the Mustang was woven into the fabric of our family life. But time has a way of shifting things. Children grow up, the house grows quiet, and hobbies that once felt like family fun begin to take on a sharper edge. And that was when the real cracks in our marriage began to show.
The strange thing about betrayal is that it never comes crashing through the front door. It seeps in through the cracks so quietly you hardly notice until the floorboards beneath you are rotten. For Harold and me, the first crack appeared the year after he turned 55. Our children were grown, the grandkids just starting to arrive. Life should have been easier, simpler, filled with the kind of joy you can only feel when the heavy lifting of raising a family is done. Instead, something shifted. At first, it was small. He started working later at the shop. "Paperwork," he said, shrugging off my questions. New suppliers, new customers, you know how it goes. And I did know. Running a household had its own version of late-night paperwork, bills, recipes, laundry lists. But Harold had never been one to linger at the shop before. He liked being home. He liked sitting down to my pot roast, the smell of rosemary filling the kitchen. Now, dinner's cooled on the table. I packed leftovers into containers. I sat across from empty chairs and wondered why the silence suddenly felt heavier. Then came the weekends. The Mustang had always been his Saturday morning ritual. A polish, a tune-up, maybe a drive down Route 40 with the windows down. I often joined him, my scarf flying in the wind, laughing like we were 20 again. But those drives grew fewer. Instead, Harold started claiming he had errands, or guys from the shop wanted to meet up, or a parts run took him out of town. At first, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? After 40 years of marriage, suspicion felt almost insulting. But one Saturday, I noticed something. His hands. If Harold had truly been working on cars, his hands would have told the story. They always had skin cracked with oil, knuckles stained with grease, nails rimmed with dirt he never could scrub out. That Saturday, though, his hands were clean. Not shop clean, not soap and water clean, manicure clean. And the faint smell of cologne, not his usual aftershave, but something younger, sharper, lingered on his shirt when he tossed it into the hamper. I remember standing in the laundry room, clutching that shirt like it was a crime scene. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might faint. But when I confronted him, I didn't accuse. I couldn't. Instead, I asked a simple question. Where were you today? He smiled easily, too easily. Oh, Tom needed help with his transmission. You know, Tom, the guy with the Corvette. I nodded, though I had never met a Tom in my life. That was when the second crack appeared. Not in him, but in me. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't believe my husband. From then on, little things kept piling up. Credit card charges at restaurants I had never been to, gas receipts from towns a little too far away to be parts runs. His phone, once left casually on the counter, now glued to his pocket. The man who once invited me everywhere, now left me nowhere. Still, I told myself stories to smooth over the cracks. Maybe he was planning a surprise. Maybe he was embarrassed about money. Maybe he was just restless. Men his age sometimes struggled with feeling older. Maybe it was harmless. But I wasn't 22 anymore, clinging to the fantasy of forever. At 62, you learn to trust the pit in your stomach. And mine was screaming. One night, he came home late, nearly midnight. I sat in the living room, lights off, pretending to doze. He didn't see me as he tiptoed in, his shoes in one hand, his shirt half unbuttoned, the ghost of a smile still playing on his lips. I wanted to shout. I wanted to demand answers, to throw accusations until he cracked. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in the dark, watching the man I had built a life with, the father of my children, the keeper of my past, walk past me like a stranger sneaking through someone else's home. And in that moment, I made a decision. If Harold was hiding something, I would not catch him by screaming in the dark. I would catch him by waiting in the light. Because the worst thing about betrayal is that it never comes crashing through the front door. It's that it makes you quiet too.
They say women have a sixth sense about these things. I used to roll my eyes at that idea. But now, I believe it with every bone in my body. Something in me refused to let Harold's excuses sit quietly anymore. If he was lying, then I would catch him. Not with shouting, not with throwing plates across the room, but with patience. The same patience I'd built across 4 decades of raising children, balancing budgets, and waiting for a man to finally come home. So, I watched. Not openly, never openly. Harold would clam up at the first whiff of suspicion. Instead, I slipped into the background. When he tossed his receipts on the counter, I tucked them into my apron pocket. When his phone buzzed while he was in the shower, I noted the numbers, the times, the patterns. And when he started disappearing on weekends, I followed. Not every time, just enough. The first time, I felt ridiculous. 62 years old, sitting in my Toyota down the street from my husband's repair shop, ducking low when his Mustang roared past. He wasn't in the Mustang that day, though. He was in his work truck, cleaner than usual. No tools rattling in the back. I followed at a careful distance, hands slick on the steering wheel. He didn't go to Tom's or the supplier's warehouse or any of the other excuses he'd offered. Instead, he pulled into the parking lot of a mid-range hotel just off the interstate. My heart didn't stop. It didn't shatter. It hardened. Because I didn't need to see who he was meeting to know. But fate didn't let me turn away. A woman slid out of a silver Lexus 2 cars down. Tall, blonde, dressed like she had stepped straight out of a catalog. Heels too high for errands, dress too fitted for comfort. She looked 10, maybe 12 years younger than Harold. Young enough to flatter him, old enough to know exactly what she was doing. And then he saw her. I had never seen my husband move so fast. Not for me, not for the kids, not even for that Mustang he loved like a third child. He strode toward her with a grin that split his face open. She touched his arm lightly, her head tipping back in a laugh. And then they disappeared inside. I sat there in the car, knuckles white on the steering wheel, forcing myself to breathe. It wasn't the first time he had lied. It wasn't the first time I had suspected. But it was the first time I had proof. Her name came later. I found it in pieces. Business cards left on the counter, whispered gossip at the shop when I dropped by pretending to bring Harold lunch. "She's in here all the time," one of the mechanics muttered when he thought I wasn't listening. "Pretty thing like that, married to him? No wonder she looks bored." Married. That was the detail that nearly undid me. Her name was Caroline. 30-something, trophy wife of Richard Harris, one of Harold's oldest and best customers. Richard drove a fleet of luxury imports, always brought them to Harold's shop, always paid top dollar. And while Richard trusted Harold with his prized cars, Harold was sneaking around with his prized wife. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was professional, social. A double-faced cruelty that cut deeper than I thought possible. Caroline would waltz into the shop under the guise of dropping off her husband's car or asking about parts. Harold followed, blinded by her laugh, her perfume, her practiced way of twirling a strand of hair around her finger. And I followed too, though quietly. I watched from the corner of the waiting room one afternoon as she leaned too close over the counter, her nails tapping lightly against Harold's hand. He didn't pull away. He didn't even flinch. He smiled. The kind of smile that had once belonged to me. The mechanics noticed too, though they said nothing. Men know when a line is being crossed, but they also know when to stay out of another man's business, especially if that man signs their paychecks. But I was not one of Harold's employees. I was his wife. And I began collecting my evidence like a prosecutor preparing for trial. A hotel receipt tucked into his glove box, a lipstick smudge on a napkin he'd left in the laundry, a text message preview, just one, when his phone lit up on the counter. Can't wait for next weekend. I never confronted him. Not yet. To confront too soon would be to lose. Instead, I let him dig his own grave, one receipt at a time. At night, when Harold snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan.
I pictured Caroline's laugh echoing in that hotel room, Harold's wedding band gleaming on his left hand as he reached for her. And I realized something I had been too afraid to admit before. The man lying next to me wasn't my husband anymore. He was Caroline's. But she wasn't going to keep him, and he wasn't going to keep the one thing he loved more than her either.
The Mustang had always been Harold's territory. I drove it a handful of times over the years, a parade here, a Sunday cruise there, but mostly I let him have his toy. It was his pride, his youngest child, the thing he polished on Saturday mornings like a priest tending an altar. But sometimes, the best way to catch a fox is to step straight into the henhouse. That Saturday, while Harold was out running errands, I slipped the Mustang's keys off the hook by the garage door. My heart pounded like a teenager sneaking out past curfew. But when the engine roared to life beneath me, I felt something I hadn't in years. Control. The red paint gleamed in the afternoon sun as I eased it out of the driveway. I didn't have a destination, not really. I just wanted to be seen. And seen I was. I cruised down Main Street, the kind of road where everyone looks twice at a car like that. Windows rolled down, wind teasing my hair. I could almost hear Harold's voice in my head. "Easy on the clutch, Maggie. She's got more kick than you think." I smiled. "Oh, yes, Harold, she's got kick all right." When I pulled into the parking lot of Harold's shop, I wasn't surprised to see a silver Lexus already parked there. My pulse quickened as the door swung open. Caroline. She strutted across the lot like a runway model, heels clicking on the pavement, perfume trailing behind her. Her smile was wide, expectant, hungry. She thought she was about to greet Harold stepping out of his beloved Mustang. But when I opened the driver's door and swung my legs out, her smile froze. "Oh," she said, blinking. "Maggie." She knew my name. Of course she did. Mistresses always do their homework. I tilted my head, pretending to search my memory. "Am sorry, have we met?" The faintest twitch crossed her lips. "Caroline, I come in sometimes. My husband brings his cars here." "Ah," I said lightly, brushing invisible dust off my skirt. "That explains it. I knew you looked familiar. You must be the one always asking Harold about, what was it, parts?" Her cheeks flushed, just slightly, but enough. "Yes, well, I suppose." She glanced at the Mustang, clearly scrambling to recover. "Beautiful car. Harold must trust you a lot to let you drive it." I smiled sweetly, slipping the keys back into my purse. "Why wouldn't he? After 40 years of marriage, I'd say I'm the safest pair of hands around." Caroline faltered. For the first time, she looked less like a trophy wife and more like a cornered animal. She murmured something about needing to get going and retreated to her Lexus, pulling out of the lot faster than necessary. I stood there in the sunlight, watching her taillights disappear, feeling a surge of satisfaction warm my chest. By the time Harold came home that evening, the Mustang was back in its rightful spot, polished just enough to make it look like he'd been the one doting on it. "Run into anyone interesting today?" I asked casually over dinner, spooning potatoes onto his plate. He hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. "No, just errands. Gas station, hardware store." "Oh?" I lifted my wine glass. "Funny. A woman pulled into the shop parking lot today when I was there. Called me by name. Caroline, I think she said." His fork froze halfway to his mouth. "She called you by name?" His voice cracked ever so slightly. "Mm-hmm," I hummed, taking a sip. "Funny thing, though, I didn't know hers. Imagine that. Woman knows me, but I couldn't place her." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "How do you suppose she knew me, Harold?" His face flushed red. He set down the fork, cleared his throat. "Well, maybe she's seen pictures?"
Around the shop, people talk. Pictures? I asked playfully. Like the one on your desk? The one of me at Mary's wedding 10 years ago? Think she memorized that? He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing came out. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch between us like a taut rope. Strange, isn't it? For a woman I've never met to know my name so easily, almost like someone's been talking about me. Harold shifted in his chair. The man who could bargain down suppliers, win over customers, charm entire car show crowds, suddenly reduced to a tongue-tied schoolboy. I smiled, sweet as pie. Well, I suppose women just have a knack for these things. Don't we, Harold? He didn't answer. He couldn't. And that silence told me more than any confession ever could.
Revenge doesn't arrive with fire and thunder. It arrives in the form of small, deliberate steps. The morning after Caroline nearly slipped in the parking lot, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, a cup of coffee, and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Harold was still asleep, snoring like the man he once was. But in my mind, I had already left him. If he wanted Caroline, he could have her, but not without losing the one thing he worshipped most, the Mustang. It wasn't enough to sell it, not enough to take away the polished red idol he called his pride and joy. It had to go to someone who would twist the knife, and that someone was Richard Harris, Caroline's husband. I'd seen him at the shop before, tall, commanding, always in tailored suits, the kind of man who shook hands like he was sealing a contract. He was Harold's best customer, but also, in my mind, the biggest fool. He brought his fleet of luxury imports to Harold, bragged about his wife, and never once saw what was happening under his nose. But I could see it, and I was going to make sure he saw it too. I called his office 3 days later, my voice calm, professional. Mr. Harris, my name is Margaret Douglas. I was wondering if you'd be interested in buying a classic Mustang, a 1967 fastback, immaculate condition. There was a pause on the line. Then, Douglas? Any relation to Harold Douglas? Yes, I said simply. His wife. Another pause. Then his tone sharpened. Why would you be selling Harold's car? Because, I said, steady as stone, it isn't his to sell anymore, and I think you'll want to hear the rest of what I have to say. Could we meet in your office? Silence hummed between us. Finally, he said, tomorrow, 10 o'clock. Walking into Richard Harris's office the next morning felt like stepping onto a stage. Glass walls, leather chairs, diplomas lining the wall, everything screamed success. He rose to greet me, crisp in his suit, eyes sharp with curiosity. Mrs. Douglas, he said, extending his hand. Please, sit. I did. Set my folder on the table. Not the car's documents, not yet. The other documents. Receipts, notes, little pieces of proof I had been collecting like crumbs on a trail. I'll be direct, I began. I'm here to sell you the Mustang, Harold's pride and joy. But before I explain the price, I think you deserve to know why. Richard leaned back, his expression unreadable. Go on. I slid the first paper across the desk, a hotel receipt, Harold's signature clear as day. Your wife checked in at the same time. I know because I was there, watching. His jaw tightened. Next, a photo. Caroline leaning too close over the counter at the shop, Harold smiling like a man in love. This has been going on for months, maybe years. I don't know how long, but I do know it's not a fling. It's deliberate. Richard stared at the evidence, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of his desk. Why are you telling me this? He asked, finally, voice low.
Because, I said, my voice steady as stone, Harold thinks he's clever, thinks he can have his wife at home and yours on the side. He's wrong. And I think you deserve to own the thing he loves most. The car. It'll sting him worse than anything I could ever say. For the first time, Richard's mask cracked. He let out a slow, humorless laugh. I've been his best customer for 15 years. Trusted him with my cars, with my business, with everything. He shook his head. And all this time he was screwing my wife? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened the folder again and laid the Mustang's title on the desk. My name was the only one listed. Harold had never bothered to change it after I signed the check for that old heap back in 1986. That little oversight was about to cost him everything. I'll sell it to you for market value. Cash. You'll have the keys by Sunday. Richard studied me for a long moment. His eyes, hard and calculating, softened just a fraction. You're not doing this for money, he said finally. No, I admitted. I'm doing this for justice. He leaned forward, folding his hands. Then maybe we can work together. You bring me what you have, and I'll add what I can find. My lawyers, my investigators. We'll make sure when Harold and Caroline's little game ends, it ends loudly. My pulse quickened. I hadn't expected an ally. I'd come here for a sale, but I was walking out with a partner. Deal, I said.
Richard picked up the title, ran a finger over the embossed seal, and smiled. Not the smile of a man pleased with his purchase, but of a man sharpening a blade. For what it's worth, Mrs. Douglas, he said, I think this might be the best investment I've ever made. I stood, collected my purse, and shook his hand. Call me Maggie. That night, Harold came home whistling, as if the weight of his lies hadn't yet caught up to him. He kissed my cheek, poured himself a drink, and didn't notice the empty spot in the drawer where the Mustang's title had once been. But he would. Soon. Harold always thought of himself as clever. That Friday morning, he kissed me goodbye with a cheerful grin, suitcase in hand, claiming he and the guys were heading upstate for a fishing trip. He even whistled on his way out the door, as if the sound could cover the stench of his lies. I smiled, handed him a thermos of coffee, and waved from the porch. To him, I was still the dutiful wife. To me, he was already a ghost. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I dialed Richard. It's time, I said. By noon, I was sitting in Richard Harris's office again, only this time I wasn't nervous. Between us on the desk lay a cashier's check with more zeros than I had ever held in my life. Beside it, a packet of papers, the Mustang's title, signed over, neat and legal. Payment in full, Richard said, sliding the check toward me. And delivery confirmed. The Mustang had been towed from my garage that morning while Harold was halfway to his rendezvous. I'd watched it go, polished paint gleaming in the sunlight, a final farewell to a machine that had stolen more of Harold's affection than I ever received. Oddly, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt free. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me. Now for the real work. He snapped his fingers, and another man entered the office. Slim build, shark eyes, carrying a leather satchel. Richard introduced him simply. This is Glenn, my private investigator. Glenn set the satchel down and opened it, spreading photographs across the desk like a dealer laying out cards. Caroline and Harold stepping into the hotel. Caroline's hand brushing his arm at the diner outside town. Harold slipping her a key in the parking lot. Each shot stamped with dates, times, locations. This is just from the last 2 weeks, Glenn said flatly. We've got more coming. Patterns, timestamps, receipts. By the time we're done, you'll both have ironclad cases. Infidelity, betrayal, damages. No wiggle room in court. I stared at the photographs, my breath catching in my throat. Proof. Not just suspicion, not just whispers. Hard, undeniable proof. Do you want me to keep going? Glenn asked. I glanced at Richard, who nodded once. Yes, I said. Document everything. Every hour, every receipt, every lie. That weekend, while Harold thought he was charming Caroline in some rented cabin or hotel suite, Glenn was 2 steps behind. His camera snapped photos of their arrival, their dinners, their stolen moments. He noted check-in times, meals charged to room service, even the way Harold left his wedding ring on the nightstand like a forgotten accessory. Meanwhile, Richard and I were building our own case. He handled logistics like a general planning a campaign. Timelines, financial records, legal contacts. I supplied the small domestic details that painted the full picture. The shirt with the cologne, the fishing excuses, the phone numbers scribbled on scraps of paper. Together, we crafted a portrait of Harold and Caroline that no judge, no lawyer, no bystander could deny. For Richard, it was business. For me, it was personal. On Sunday evening, Harold came home looking 10 years younger. His hair was combed, his skin freshly shaven, and his smile carried the smug glow of a man who thought he had gotten away with something. He kissed my cheek, dropped his suitcase by the door, and glanced instinctively toward the garage. Strange, he said, frowning. Car looks like it hasn't moved all weekend. I forced a smile, stirring the pot of stew on the stove. Guess she wanted a rest? He chuckled, satisfied with his little joke, and poured himself a drink.
I watched him from across the kitchen, feeling like a scientist studying a specimen under glass. Here was a man living in 2 worlds, one built on lies and lust, the other on comfort and routine. He thought he could balance them forever, as if neither would notice the other, but the scales were already tipping. That night, as Harold snored beside me, my phone buzzed with a new message. Glenn. 3 attachments. The first, Harold and Caroline kissing in the parking lot, her hand fisted in his shirt like a teenager's crush. The second, them walking hand in hand into a hotel room. The third, Harold at breakfast, feeding her a forkful of pancakes, wedding ring absent from his hand. The timestamps matched the exact hours Harold had texted me. Long day on the lake. Hope your weekend's good too. I stared at those images in the glow of my phone screen, the evidence searing into me. It was no longer suspicion. It was no longer guessing. It was fact. And with each fact, Harold was losing the case before it even began. I turned off my phone, rolled onto my side, and let the sound of his snoring wash over me. For the first time in years, it didn't make me angry. It made me smile, because I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Monday mornings at Harold's shop always buzzed, phones ringing, mechanics rolling out tool carts, customers sipping burnt coffee while waiting for their cars. But that morning, the hum was interrupted by the unmistakable growl of a V8 engine, the Mustang. Heads turned as the candy apple red fastback rolled into the lot, sunlight glinting off its polished chrome. But it wasn't Harold behind the wheel. It was Richard Harris. He parked neatly in front of the office, killed the engine, and stepped out in a tailored suit. A thick manila envelope swung casually in his hand. Inside, Caroline froze. She had been perched on the counter, chatting too sweetly with Harold, her laughter just a little too loud. At the sound of the Mustang, her face lit up until she saw who climbed out. Richard, her husband. And not only that, he had arrived in Harold's most precious possession. Harold burst through the office door, confusion stamped across his face. "What the hell is going on? That's my car!" Richard adjusted his cufflinks, strolling toward him with the calm precision of a man who owned the ground he walked on. "Your car," he repeated, his voice low, measured. "Funny, the paperwork in this envelope says otherwise."
He held up the manila packet and slapped it into Harold's chest. Signed title, bill of sale, paid in full, from the rightful owner. His hands shook as he fumbled with the papers. His eyes darted across the signatures, the seals, the bank stamps, all there, all legal. He whispered, "Maggie." Richard's eyes burned with fury as he turned his attention to Caroline. She had gone pale, lips parted, eyes wide with panic. You should have seen her face when she thought Harold was driving it, like Christmas morning. Shame it was me behind the wheel. Caroline sputtered, "Richard, I can explain." But he cut her off with a glare sharp enough to slice through glass. "Don't bother. Glenn's been explaining plenty for both of you." The name landed like a hammer. Glenn, the investigator. Caroline's hands trembled. Harold's face drained of color. Richard leaned close, his voice quiet, but carrying across the stunned office. "You betrayed your vows. You betrayed me. And you," he jabbed a finger at Harold, "betrayed my trust as a customer, a friend. Now, you've both got nothing, except shame." He turned, strode back to the Mustang, and fired up the engine. The roar filled the shop, drowning out the gasps, the whispers, the sound of Harold's world collapsing. As Richard pulled away, Caroline bolted out the back door, tears streaking her perfect makeup. Harold remained rooted to the floor, clutching the envelope like it was a live grenade. The mechanics, his men, stood silent. Some looked away, some shook their heads, but none defended him. Not this time. That evening, Harold drove home, shoulders hunched, jaw clenched tight. He imagined the comfort of his favorite chair, a stiff drink, and the Mustang waiting safe in the garage. Anything to make sense of the day's disaster. But when he pulled into the driveway, his headlights swept across something unexpected. A shiny, new deadbolt glinting on the front door. His key didn't fit. He tried again, jamming it harder. Nothing. He rattled the knob, pounded the frame. Still nothing. The porch light flicked on. I stood inside, arms crossed, calm as stone. Behind me, a suitcase sat neatly packed on the floor. Not mine. His. Through the glass, I met his eyes. For a long, frozen moment, neither of us moved.
Finally, I lifted an envelope and pressed it against the window. Divorce papers. The second page bore his name, clear and sharp. His mouth opened, then closed. He pounded the glass once, a desperate thud. "Maggie!" But I only shook my head, slow and deliberate. I mouthed the words, each one sharp enough to cut. "Stay at the office." His face contorted, anger, confusion, humiliation all twisting together. But he couldn't enter, not anymore. He was locked out of his home, out of his marriage, out of the life he thought he controlled. And for the first time in 40 years, I slept soundly under my own roof, without him. The days after Harold's downfall moved like honey, slow, sticky, impossible to wash off. For 40 years, I had measured time and meals cooked, laundry folded, cars waxed, children grown. Now I measured it in the absence of him. The absence was sweeter than I imagined. By Tuesday morning, the locks had settled into their new grooves. The house felt different, lighter. I opened the windows, let the spring air in, and for the first time in years, I sat at the kitchen table without waiting for his footsteps. The divorce papers sat neatly filed on my desk, copies already with my lawyer.
Glenn's photographs, receipts, and timestamps stacked high enough to silence any protest Harold might attempt. No judge in the state would see him as a faithful husband. No lawyer could spin him as a victim. And then, the whispers began. Spouses talk, mechanics gossip, customers notice. Word spread fast. Harold's affair exposed, his Mustang sold out from under him, his wife filing for divorce. The humiliation burned hotter than any flame I could have set myself. But the final blow didn't come from me. It came from Caroline. Richard filed for divorce within a week, his evidence airtight. Caroline, stripped of her jewelry allowance, her country club membership, and her husband's blind devotion, found herself with nowhere to land. She turned to Harold, naturally, her partner in deceit. But Harold had nothing left to give. His reputation at the shop was in tatters. Customers dropped off, disgusted that a man they trusted had betrayed the very man who brought them in. Employees avoided his gaze. And the Mustang, the symbol of his pride, his lure, his status, was gone. Caroline lasted 3 weeks. 3 miserable, scandal-soaked weeks before she walked out, leaving Harold with nothing but the echo of her perfume and the empty promises of a love affair built on lies. I heard it from one of the mechanics. He said she packed up in the middle of the night, didn't even leave a note. Somehow, that felt right. A woman who built her life on surface gloss was always going to disappear when the shine wore off. And Harold? He was left sitting in his office at the shop, night after night, like a man waiting for a train that would never come. No wife, no mistress, no Mustang. As for me, freedom wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was the silence of my own kitchen, filled only with the sound of my coffee brewing in the morning. It was the click of my new locks at night, solid and secure. It was knowing my life no longer revolved around a man who gave his heart away in motel rooms and polished steel. Richard and I kept in touch. Not romantically, not at first. Ours was a bond forged in betrayal, a mutual understanding that sometimes justice comes only when you take it into your own hands. He would send updates now and then, court dates set, or divorce finalized. I'd reply with a polite, glad to hear, and leave it at that. But once, when we crossed paths at the grocery store, he paused beside me at the produce section. "How are you, Maggie?" he asked gently. I thought about lying, about saying the standard, "I'm fine." Instead, I told the truth. "I'm free." He smiled. Then we both won. One evening, I found myself standing in the garage. The empty space where the Mustang once sat seemed to breathe differently now. For years, I had hated that car, resented the hours Harold poured into it, the attention it stole from our marriage. But now, the emptiness wasn't bitter. It was clean.
I touched the workbench, still scattered with Harold's old tools, and whispered to myself, it was never the car's fault. No, the fault had always been Harold's. His choices, his lies, his cowardice. The Mustang was just the stage where his downfall played out. By summer, the divorce was finalized. The house was mine. The savings, what remained of them, were mine. And Harold? He was left with debts, an office nobody respected, and a reputation so shredded even Caroline wouldn't salvage it. I celebrated not with champagne, not with parties, but with something simpler. A porch swing. I had one installed on the front porch. The kind Maria, my daughter, used to beg me for when she was little. Now, in the evenings, I sat on that swing with a glass of iced tea, the setting sun warming my face. And I realized something I hadn't in decades. I liked my own company.
The quiet was not lonely. It was mine. Sometimes neighbors would ask about Harold. "How's he holding up?" they'd say, eyes darting with curiosity. I'd smile, polite as ever. "Oh, you know Harold, always at the office." They didn't need to know. The office was all he had left. And at night, when I locked the door, I sometimes thought of the note I'd left with the divorce papers and the car sale receipt. 3 simple words. "She can drive you now." But she couldn't, because she was gone too. And I, for once in my life, was exactly where I belonged, at the wheel of my own future.